Hello, good morning! So, welcome to Elizabeth patterning, I suppose. There's a lot of it. There's gonna be a lot of patterning and a lot of draping, and I assume I'm probably going to use a lot of techniques that I don't normally use, so this should be an interesting one. And a long one. Just stating it now, this is gonna take a minute. Yeah, we have 3 different bodice layers that I'm going to have to pattern, as well as a sleeve pattern that's going to be interesting. I don't actually know if I'm going to pattern it like a regular sleeve. I don't know. We're gonna have to do some samples. And a sleeve drapey thingy madoodle that I'm gonna have to do. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot of techniques I've never done before. This costume has a drop shoulder where this part of your sleeve, if you have a sleeve, your armhole is dropped. It's like this, and then this is all fabric. Never done that before. It has a yoke with a very interesting line to it, and then there's the rib corset as well as the tulle layer. So I'm literally going to use different techniques for all of this, quite honestly. So to start, I guess we'll just start from the bottom up. How about? Okay, let's get started. We have a lot to do.
Welcome back to another I have nothing planned for this voiceover, so I'm truly just going to ramble as I watch the screen. You know, honestly, these are some of my best. So I started out with my princess seam slopers, and then I'm actually using a different method than I usually use, which is cut and fold slash and spread. That's what it's called. So I traced out my princess seams, and then I'm going in and I'm marking the waist. I'm also taking the waist on the side seam out a 1/2 inch on both the front and the back, just to help fit in all of those really thick cartridge pleats, you know? And also, I'm just not that shape, so, you know. And then I cut out each of the pattern pieces and I'm kind of lining them up, and I am moving the princess seam on the front so that it is down a little further and can be better hidden underneath all of the other layers of the corset. I lined everything up, kind of traced it so that I have a very full armhole to do a drop sleeve. Now listen, I made this all up as I was going. I basically just took the shoulder armhole up a little bit on the front and the back, and then I added like 1 inch to it, I think. And then I just matched them up and traced. I also dropped the armpit seam basically by 1/2 inch so that it wouldn't be quite so tight on my little arms. I always forget to do that, and then the sleeves are so tight and I can't lift my arms and it sucks. And I honestly should probably drop it a little bit more because I want to move. Anyways, I'm just drawing in that new armhole there. I'm using a dark colored pencil so that you can see it better. And then I'm also just going to go back in and trace my pattern lines. I've fully connected the very top of the princess seam because I know that there's going to be a yoke that is going to change the shape of the entire top section of this pattern. I'm also lining up the bottom to get a nice proper waistline that I will trace separately in a moment. I'm making more of a map for the pattern to start out with, and then I'm going to trace completely new pattern pieces off of all of these maps that I'm creating right now. Here's where I try to start the yoke. It was really difficult to figure it out, and I ended up changing it later down the road anyways. But because this pattern does not have a shoulder seam, I had to make sure that everything was lined up really nicely, especially when I traced the maps here. I would also recommend, if you're going to do this, to put a ton of notches along that yoke line, because this first one was so hard to sew because I didn't have any. So it was literally a guessing game, and there was a really, really sharp corner that was just a nightmare. So when I start tracing these side pieces, these are the ones that are the most difficult to trace. I'm basically start by tracing the new armhole line and the top of the pattern, and then I continue it off of the base sloper before dropping it down to where I've connected it to the front or back piece at the princess seams and drawn that new waistline. And for this costume, we are doing a full mock-up. Like, we are pulling out all the stops. I don't really do samples or mock-ups, but we are doing it here. We're doing so many, in fact. If you'll notice here, I thought I was done. I forgot to sew the side seams. I don't know how I did that. Like, literally, I laughed at myself so hard when I did that. And also, I don't know why this pattern fits so weird. I've used this pattern for literal years. I've made so many costumes out of this pattern, and it has never fit like this. So truly, I am befuddled by the fit of this. I never have to make adjustments. I'm so glad I made a sample. But I'm taking it out slightly where you can see it pulling just under the bust here. And I'm just undoing the stitches, and then I am letting it spread out how much it wants evenly and pinning it with some little pin. Then I also took out the waist on the back just slightly, and then I took in the waist on the front, but then I decided to leave it as it is because I know that I'm going to be more comfortable with it being a little bit larger in the waist than if it's tight. Now we're getting into the draping of the tulle layer. This was just so much fun. I had a great time. I hope you can hear the sarcasm in my voice. So if you do this, here is how I would recommend doing this. Not how I did it, basically. So what I think you should do is you should draft one large dart that goes down the princess seam line in the front, and then once you have the rest of the edges all figured out, go back in on that one big dart and separate it out into the 3 individual darts that are the tulle layer. There are really, really good photos that show you exactly what these darts look like, so that was the easy part. The hard part was that I did the darts and I really liked the way that they looked, and then I realized, oh man, I don't know if that's the right amount of fabric that's supposed to be in these darts. It ended up being fine. I did have like a little bit of leftover material in the armpit area that I just put into a little dart there that will be hidden by other layers, because there are so many layers to this costume. Like, you really can't hide your mistakes well. Not that it was a mistake, it was just like a learning curve, and I learned, and now you've learned. So once I had these lovely, gorgeous darts in, I just continued kind of manipulating the fabric. The best way to drape is to kind of drag your fingernails and have it catch on the warp threads of the fabric, and then pin it, cut a little like clip in where it's pulling up to where your line is going to be, because that fabric's not going to be there in the end result anyways, and it's just creating tension. So you could see all that tension release as soon as I put those clips in, and I just clipped them up to the edge of the sample underneath it because that's as far as it needed to go. And then I was able to repin it, and everything worked out just fine. Now, going off of this armhole was a nightmare, I'm not gonna lie. I did come in and repin everything on the back, and I did just connect this to the back yoke pattern. The back pattern for the tulle overlay is the exact same as the satin bodice, so luckily none of that has to change at all. And then I just ended up pinning everything together. The sample does have the seam allowance still in the armhole. I didn't cut it off, so that is why it looks that way. And then once I was happy with everything, I just traced it with a mechanical pencil. That made it really difficult. Use like a regular pencil. And then I took it off. I redid all of my lines with red pen, actually, for some reason. I don't know why I was obsessed with the red pen. But then I just put it on paper with my tracing wheel. And don't run your fingers over with these because it actually really hurts. And also, I totally missed like 3 lines while I was doing this. So yeah, be careful. But I just traced everything, I cleaned it up, and yeah. I did actually go back in on a lot of the lines that would be the exact same on the satin bodice, and I just fully traced them. Like the neck hole, the yoke line, I just traced them. And I did go in and give myself some shaped darts as well, where I went in and pinned them closed, and then I tried to trace them here, and then I realized that that was just gonna be a nightmare, so I ended up just clipping off the waist hem allowance anyways. It's just so much easier to trace it when there's just an edge and not having to use the rotary wheel, even though I love her. And right here is about where my camera died, so here's what we did in the meantime. I put that on paper, I added all the seam allowance, and then I thought, I don't know if this waist is gonna work, but we'll see. And then after that was when I started trying to drape the bone corset, the rib corset, whatever you want to call it. It's basically the middle layer. It's the meat of the sandwich. And that was an absolute nightmare because this doesn't fit on the dress form right now. So I ended up fully just drawing it on the bodice, like sample. But while I was doing that, I also realized that I hated the placement of the yoke line on the front and that it was bad and wrong. So I also moved that up, and we'll cover that in a moment. But this was weird because I felt like all of the sections were really, really small as I was drawing them on. And I really felt like they were way too close together and that it wasn't gonna look good and that it wasn't gonna lay right. But I just like trusted my process, and I knew that if this didn't work out, I'd be able to do it again a different way. So I just continued to draw with more colors and more pens and more lines, and somehow we got there in the end, and it did look really good. And I did fully focus on the front first, and then I did the back, and then I did the side. But I'm having all of these be like one long piece for the entire thing basically, and then connected at the side seam and maybe a little bit further out in the final product. I haven't decided yet. But yeah, trusting the process actually did work out this time, so that's cool. Oh, we're back to the yoke. Okay, everyone lock back in on the satin layer. There's so many layers. I'm so sorry. I don't know why. It's just all over the place. I was doing a lot at once. So I drew on my notches that I didn't have in the first draft because I knew I needed those. And then I just cut directly on that line that I had drawn. And I knew I was just going to be tracing these onto the existing patterns. So I just cut down the seam line for the princess seam to get that new seam adjusted. And then I taped on some paper and lined it up and traced those new lines. It's really, truly that easy to alter a pattern. I'm not going to lie. Like, if you have a basic pattern that fits you like this and you just make a sample and throw it up there and draw on new seam lines, usually it's gonna work. Like, you might have to do some trial and error, especially when you're first starting out doing this, but truly that's gonna be your best friend when you start patterning. Okay, and back to the rib corset. Here we go. I started cutting out all of the edges and getting it all nice and precise and everything. And then I went through and I drew on the kind of boning sections. There's a middle boning section on the center front and then the back one. And I started cutting out all of the like lengths of the ribs, and then I realized that that was dumb because I need those lengths to be precise for the center front and center back. So you'll see me going back in and pulling out all the scraps and taping them back together to trace them. I also realized really early on that these needed to be super precisely labeled because there are 6 of them and they could get so tangled up so quickly. Like, it would be a nightmare trying to figure out what is what if you don't label them. One thing I will say about this is the gaps seem like they're going to be really small, but when it actually went up and was the finished product, they were honestly pretty perfect. Now for putting it all onto paper, I started with the center back and the center front. And on the back, I did 1/2-inch seam allowances because that is a much bigger piece and it is going to be where the eyelets go. Having more material there is better than less. But for the front, because it's such a skinny little piece of fabric, I only did 1/4-inch seam allowances, and I honestly may change it to be on a fold rather than have a seam. I just need to look at her dress more to figure out which one I'm gonna like better. And when tracing the ribs, I did just start pinning them down, and then I realized I wanted a little bit of wiggle room in there. So I unpicked the side seams, and I added 3/8 of an inch in between the 2 side seams. I just felt like it needed a little bit of space. I didn't want it to be super tight. And because it's the exact same pattern as the other bodice, I just want to make sure that everything is going to lace nicely together and that this has a little tiny bit of wiggle room on top. And I don't know, 3/8 sounded like the right number. So I just squared that off at the top basically and lined up the edges on all of them and then went to town. And I added that same 1/2-inch seam allowance to the back and 1/4-inch to the front. So these are actually weird because in the final version, they do have a piping over them. So I don't actually need to add any seam allowance to the tops and bottoms of each rib because I'm just gonna put like a little casing around the edge and that'll be what finishes it. Now for this here mock-up, I started with the front and the back and I cut off the top and bottom seam allowances and then I just folded down the seam allowances that each of these are going to connect to, and I just started slowly pinning them on unpinning them, redoing the spacing. It was like just a lot of figuring out how they fit, where they go, what's going on. I was really scared for a minute, but then it looked really good. Like, you'll see, it looked really good. It was about here that I decided I did need something concrete and structured connecting them at the side seam. So I basically just took all of the pattern pieces and folded them at one of those marks where the side seam was, and drew a line, lined them up, and then attached this little 3/8 inch little piece of muslin fabric I found laying around. And then I sewed it with a zigzag there, and it was a nice little test on what the final version will be. In the final version, that's going to be hidden, but it does feel necessary, and I genuinely might even take it out a little bit further or do some little invisible stitches in that little casing that I was just talking about. We're gonna figure it out when we get there. But as soon as I had this on, I knew it was gonna need more support, and I ended up kind of pinning it around the sides just to see what it was gonna look like. I am not sure what's gonna happen there yet.
Okay, I currently have a dilemma of if I actually like my tulle pattern or not, especially since I forgot I needed to pattern it over the bone corset, but the bone corset is pretty much just the bodice because I did just draw it straight on the bodice pattern. So I have just pinned this back together rather than do like a whole mock-up of the tulle layer. I have just pinned the draft back together so that I can just throw this on and see, because I genuinely am very close to just completely redrafting this, but if I do that, that will not be today. So yeah, let me just, this is also difficult because obviously it's not tulle gonna look the same. Okay, and I am already having like issues with it not fitting properly in some places. However, this is just like an issue of this not being exact to the dress form because I have left some room in the waist. Obviously, it is sitting like out honestly kind of far from the waist of the dress form, but it's gonna fit me better. And I think also if I just curve the side seams slightly out, it'll be less like, you know? Because the rest of this is gonna be just lovely. So the thing is, it's just the side seam that's the issue, and the hem, which are very easy fixes that I can tell right now. Okay, so I just need to add onto the hem, which I already knew was gonna be a thing. I'm honestly probably just gonna add an inch to the hem of the tulle layer because it does have to just kind of tuck under both of these layers. You feel me? And the back of the tulle layer is just the same bodice pattern, but I didn't make up what was going on here on the bodice layer, on the satin bodice layer, but I kind of made it up. It probably is like darts like this, but I figured you're not going to be able to see this princess seam in the final version with everything else that's going on. I think what I'm going to do is use this as like a very basic guide and then retrace this yoke line. This armhole is almost perfect. So, okay, I'm glad I didn't completely redraft, but I'm also glad that I didn't do like a complete sample because that would have been a nightmare. This was the right choice, in my humble opinion. I also added quite a bit to the bone corset, so I knew that the side seam was going to be wrong again, and I also just had a feeling that the hem was going to be wrong again. To be fair, this isn't laying, oh whack, that actually is laying perfectly. Cool, 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 cool. So, this is officially our sample then. That means it's time to order the satin, isn't it? Okay, and then we'll just take this, you know, one little layer at a time. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed. This was a lot, I'm not gonna lie. This certainly was a lot, and I have something else in the works right now that you will not be seeing until July, so that's fun, but thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!